everybody, it's Abby Metcalf back coming at you. I had my little teaser before, but this is the real deal. So I've gotten a lot of questions from all of you about, it's really about how to motivate people to get them to do what you want. So, how do you, with your partner or your kids or anybody really, how do you, encourage them or speak to them in such a way that they'll actually do what you want them to do without you feeling like you have to nag. And we in the counseling world actually have a evidence-based technique, something that's been studied for many years that does this. How do you like that? Because as counselors, that's one of the things we need to do, right? Someone comes in the office, and I don't care if you're my level psychologist or a, entry-level counselor, it doesn't matter. When you guys come in the office, we're sort of stuck sometimes in trying to help you understand what you need to do to get better. But you'll often come in with one problem, thinking it's one thing, and we think, oh my God, it's so this other thing. But how do you say that to someone? How do you encourage them, move them along, motivate, inspire? How do you do that to get them from A to B without bossing them around, doing what I said not to do the other week? Remember, giving suggestions or advice, what is that about? So here's what's cool. I'm going to teach it to you today. I'm going to teach you how to do this, and you're going to remember it with an acronym called OARS, and I'm going to explain what that is. But you know me, I always like anything that has something you can remember easily. I did not come up with this acronym, so I want to be clear of where I'm taking this from. So there's a really just change the game kind of book called Motivational Interviewing that came out many years ago by Millers and Rolnick. And any counselor or psychologist worth their stuff knows this book well, and it's really all about change, how people can effectively change, how to get them from A to B, right, or even A to Z. And really what we want is when someone is doing something we don't like, or they're, having a hard time, whatever's happening. Now think of yourself in this situation. Let me just start there. If you're having a hard time, you're freaking out about, I don't know, something going on at work, something with your kids, just something internally, maybe you don't like how your butt looks, I don't know, whatever it is that might be upsetting you or worrying you. When that happens and someone comes at you with all those great suggestions, advice, things you could do, try this, try that, you got to remember what happens. We get defensive, right? I mean, I do. Someone comes at me, my poor partner, he comes at me with all kinds of great ideas, and I end up like, well, all the reasons why I can't do that. And so really, and that happens with us as counselors, right? People come in, they have a problem, and we might say, oh, try this, try that, do this, do that. And people are often very resistant to that because we're humans and we don't like getting told what to do. I don't care who you are, where you're from, what your background is. That's how it goes. And I mentioned in the last video, if you haven't seen it, you can go back and take a look, but the video like 2 weeks ago, I think it was, that I talked about how when people are resisting, when they're in a resistance mode, they're doing things like interrupting you. They might be rolling their eyes at you, arguing. Obviously, just fighting with you is resisting something that you're saying. They might be, in denying, like that doesn't work, I can't do that. Overanalyzing, going into all the facts and that kind of thing. Obviously, any kind of inattention, completely ignoring you, is also a way to resist you. All of these kinds of things are resistance. When you're in a conversation, someone's doing them, you need to stop, because it's like talking, I say it's like talking to a drunk person. You ever talk to someone who's drunk? You're talking to a bottle, right? You're not talking to the person. So it's the same kind of thing when people are in these resistance modes. Nothing you're saying is really getting through. So how do you break through? Well, these dudes, Millers and Rolnick, figured it out. They did the research, and again, this is an evidence-based model that's been studied for many, many years now. And what we found is that there's a technique you can use to communicate with people, to talk to them in such a way that they'll actually start to come up with their own good ideas. So instead of you making a suggestion, they actually on their side think, maybe I should stop smoking, or hey, maybe it's time I stop drinking, or oh, I should be bringing the toilet paper up to this, the second floor. I got a lot of emails about that toilet paper, by the way. There was a story I told a few weeks ago about a client I have who gets upset because she leaves, she bought all this toilet paper home that had to go up to a second floor bathroom, and her husband kept going around it. And he even got to the point where he moved it to the side because it was in his way, instead of just carrying it upstairs, which is why she left it there, hoping that he would just take it upstairs without her having to ask. Anyway, so a lot of you wrote in with your own stories about how much you related to her. So if that client ever wants to out herself in the comments, you can, and people can know who you are, but needless to say, you're not alone. So anyway, so when you have those situations though, and you're really trying to get someone on board, what can you do? So there's really a 4 kind of piece process that you can engage in. And again, the acronym is OARS, O-A-R-S. So I call it rowing yourself to happiness with OARS, right? With this little acronym. And the acronym goes like this. The O is for open-ended questions. Now, we talked about this a little in the last video I did, where I talked about how it's really important not to sack your relationship, no suggestions, advice, or criticism. All right, remember that? And I said, well, what do you do? What you do is ask questions. And I was really clear in that video that you ask a very particular kind of question, which are open-ended questions. These are questions that you can't answer with yes, no, good, fine, a shoulder shrug, that kind of stuff, a one-word answer. These are questions that lead a person, that engage a person, that hold a person, that get them curious or engaged in some way so that they'll have a conversation with you instead of, again, that resistance, which is, I don't know, and fine, and yeah, and good, and those kind of answers. That's really a form of resistance when you think about it. The person is not interested in what you're saying or doing. So again, you could keep asking these bad questions, or you could change and start to ask different kinds of questions. What's, one thing I could say right now that would really help you? Tell me 2 things you've tried in that situation with Barb at work that worked, or 2 things that didn't work. Tell me a couple things that didn't work that you've tried so far. If there's one thing I could say that would help make the situation better, what would it be? And the person, again, might be resistant and say, there's nothing you can say. And you would say something like, if I had a gun to your head or I had $1 million I was going to give you, and you had to come up with one thing I could say to help, and I was going to give you $1 million for it, what would it be? And people will come up with something, trust me, even though obviously you're not going to give them $1 million, but they get the point that, you're pushing them, you're engaging them, you're not taking kind of no for an answer. So any of those one-word answers we call closed-ended questions. I know, brilliant, right? Open-ended, closed-ended. And really meaning because it closes a conversation. It stops a conversation. So that's the O of OARS. When you start asking these questions, again, these kind of collaborative, working together questions, people start to get engaged and they start to use their brain a little bit. They start to wake up in the conversation. You can already see, right, how you might have a better shot of them actually doing what you want because you're already getting them to talk. So that's number 1. Then we have an A, right? O-A-R-S. So the A in OARS is affirmations. Now, I am not a big fan of affirmations, as people know, as far as doing things like looking in a mirror and saying, I'm great, or I'm good, or whatever those kinds of things are. Affirmations don't really work if they're not true. So in other words, now it might be true that you're fabulous and wonderful, but if you don't believe it, it doesn't really work to do it that way. It's the same thing really in ways you need to think of it the same way when you're talking to other people. It's okay that they don't believe it, but it does have to be true in your way of thinking. So I was talking to a client the other day and he was really stuck with something and we were going back and forth and I said, you're such a good man. And because he is, what a great guy. I have great clients. Thank you all. And I said, you're such a good man. This must be just eating at you, the kind of person you are. There's no way that this issue he'd brought up, I said, isn't eating at you because of the kind of person you are. And he, his eyes welled up and he, had emotion in his throat. You could hear it. He was fighting. And he said, yeah. And, because it hit him, what I was saying as true, even though this is not a guy who would run around saying, I'm a good man. I'm a good guy. It's not exactly how he would talk about himself, but he knew I believed it. And I was completely sincere as I said it. Now, here's the cool thing with the OARS. And I'm still going to tell you the R and the S. What you do is you kind of go back and forth. So after I said that to him, I then asked an open-ended question to come back to the conversation to see if I could elicit a little something, to see if I could, bring him along in the conversation of where, again, trying to get him kind of from A to D, and we were stuck at maybe B. We hadn't really moved that far. Just asking the open-ended questions. And so when I did the affirmation, he got a little deeper, right? He got like, I'm a good man. Yeah, this is really troubling me because of who I am. It's really not sitting well in my mind. So now when I ask a question again, he's just in a different place and he's able to answer differently. So open-ended questions, affirmations, that's your OA. The R is for something called reflective listening. I'm going to come back to it because it's the toughest one and I want to come back to it in a minute. But the S, so OARS, the S is for summarizing. So a great thing to do to move conversations along and to, again, really get a person to know that you're listening and engaged and to get them to think about what they're saying is to S, summarize. And you all know this one. This is a pretty common one. It's saying something like, what I heard you say was, or what I think you're saying is, or something like that, right? What I hear you saying is. You're in some way, again, and then you should summarize it and say, so I hear you saying that you don't want to go back to work because it just feels so demeaning, something like that. And again, you take that from what the person said, right? You do that. Now, again, saying something like that, a summary like that, summarizing like that, you might then go to an affirmation. Wow, you're such a hard worker. I've known you for 10 years and you are the hardest worker. It must be killing you to think of quitting your job. See, there's an affirmation in there with a little question, right? And the question's not the best open-ended question, but it's not the worst. And because you might say, is it? Like, how do you feel about, because how do you feel is usually more than one thing, right? How do you feel about not working right now? And you start to ask that, again, after the summary, right? Now I went to a little affirmation and now I'm moving into a question. So see how that sort of moves? It's really great. Now, you could just do those. Let me just say that. If you just did O's without the R, you would still get a conversation moving. You would find yourself really having people start to think more about what they're saying and what they're thinking, uncover a little bit, really get a little deeper in a conversation. That's great. But the R is also really helpful, this reflective listening. And let me tell you this one. This one's much different, and it's not something you're used to doing, so it's a little different. So let me explain. Reflective listening means that you make a statement about what you believe the person meant. So let me explain. So summarizing, I'm sort of asking a question, right? I'm sort of questioning. I'm saying, so what I hear you say is, right? I do that in that kind of questioning tone. I'm making a guess as to what I think, and they're going to say yes or no. With reflective listening, I say it as a statement, and it's really meant to me, I use reflective listening to really push people out of those really stuck places. So, for example, I had a young man who came to my office not that long ago who was mandated to me. He had gotten caught, a lot of people know I have a drug and alcohol specialty. He had gotten caught with drugs and he'd had to go to court. There was a whole thing going on and he was kind of mandated to come and get like an assessment. And so I met with him and we were talking and he was, blaming everybody, blaming the cop, who caught him and blaming his parents for, not answering his phone call when he called because he ended up in jail and it got worse and he was blaming everybody and taking no responsibility pretty much. And so when I first started talking to him, of course, I always ask, hey, how can I help you? It's one of the first things I ask when people sit down, especially in this situation. And he said, he goes, well, you can't help me. There's nothing you can do. I'm stuck and I'm screwed. He sort of said something like that. And so obviously this is someone who didn't want to be there, who you might relate to this because people feel mandated in your own home, don't they? You have kids who do not want to be doing homework. You have a husband or a wife who does not want to be, mowing the lawn or taking in the garbage or, putting away the dishes or whatever it is, right? You have these sort of people who are kind of fighting you. And so I know you know what it feels like to have somebody feeling kind of a little bit hostile in front of you almost, right? Or a little bit, certainly very resistant. And so reflective listening is really great. So what is this kid telling me? He's telling me that all is lost. He's totally screwed. He has no power in the world. And that's that. There's nothing he can do, right? There's nothing. So that's what I said, because I made a, clear observation to me about what he meant. And so I said to him, and it can be definitely a little instigating and a little poking. I said it just with a lot of clarity and calmness, but I said, so you're totally screwed and your life is pretty much ruined. And I meant it when I said it, because that's how if I was going along with what he presented, that's the truth. That's what he was trying to say, as far as I was concerned. And he of course got upset with me a little bit. And he said, what the hell? I didn't say that. I didn't say my life was ruined. Now, notice this. I have somebody who doesn't want to be there, who's completely resistant, who's now arguing that his life is not ruined, right? He's arguing me. I didn't say it. He's saying it. This is the beauty of motivational interviewing. So now, right, I'm in. Now I turned around and said, so now I ask a question. And I said, oh, well, that's what I heard you say. Could you repeat then why you're here or how I can help you? Because I must have heard it wrong. And then he repeated, well, I do have to be here because, all this stuff's going on. But I guess if you could help me, it would be how to get through this as painlessly as possible. And I said, oh, so there is some hope for our relationship. There is something. I summarized, right? So now what I hear you saying, I didn't say what I hear you saying. I just said it. I said, so you see some hope and maybe that I could help you. And I said it as a question now, not as a statement. And you see, I could help you a little. We could try to figure this out together. And he said, and then he did ask some questions. He said, well, who do you really work for? He started to try to find out, like, if I was on his side. And that was great. I have no trouble answering those questions. And now here he is, this silent, kind of sullen kid. Well, he's not that much of a kid, but I'm old. So young man in his mid-20s, asking me, engaging me, completely the other way, having these questions for me, which I don't mind again at all. This is the good thing, right? So even though he was still a little defensive and sort of a little interrogating, it's okay because he's engaged, right? Now I've got him. Now we can talk, and we actually had a really good session and ended up, doing some pretty good work for that first session, considering how he came in the door. Now again, you go back and forth between the reflective listening, some summarizing, asking an open-ended question, maybe making an affirmation. Now, I didn't know this kid that well, so I didn't really have a good sense of him. So I didn't, as I'm recalling, make any affirmations with him because it would have sounded kind of false if I had said that he was a hard worker or, I don't know, a good student. I don't know what I might have said about him because I didn't really know him. So in those cases, don't say it. If it's not true, don't say it. Also, don't do reflective listening, that kind of R of OARS. Don't make those statements just to get under people's skin. Don't do it to dig. Don't do it as an FU. Don't do that. That's never going to lead you down the path to communication, is it? That's never going to seem like you're going to be able to make it their idea instead of yours. So, but what ended up happening with this kid, for example, this young man, for example, is that by the end of the session, he was really able to problem solve with me and come up with his own solutions about some paths we could follow. And that now was making it his idea instead of mine, right? And people are so much more motivated when it's their idea versus when they think you're trying to tell them something or control them. And again, this can work with your partner, this can work with kids, this can work really with anybody. If you go back and forth between the different pieces of OARS and really use them in a way and that really feels true to you. Now, again, you might feel more comfortable just using, I don't know, like the questions maybe and summarizing. That's fine. Leave out the other two for now. Practice with those a little bit and see how far you get. Maybe throw in an affirmation here and there if you can. And again, the reflective listening could be something that feels a little more advanced in the OARS, and it's not as hard as you might think as I'm talking. I know when I train therapists on this, motivational interviewing, and sometimes takes them a minute to catch this part, but it's funny when I train lay people on this, people like you listening who aren't trained therapists, they actually have an easier time. I think they don't have a lot of stuff in their head about what it means or doesn't mean. So again, making just kind of that statement about what you hear the person saying, but not as a question. So there you have it. So if you want to really engage people in conversation, get them to a place where maybe they could come up with the ideas instead of you telling them ideas, you want to use OARS. Open-ended questions, making affirmations, some reflective listening, and some summarizing. All right, and that is it for today. I'm hoping you found everything super helpful. It's always my goal. And as you know, you can always email me at abby@abbymetcalf.com, or you can comment under the video. I'd love to hear what you learned trying to use OARS.